Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everybody, and welcome to another session of Expand Your Horizon. Today with us, Liz Bennett. Hi, Liz.
It is truly a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're the CEO of Endolith, and we'll hear much more about Endolith soon. Thank you very much for taking the time joining us. Where are you based these days?
Denver, Colorado, where it is probably 10 degrees C, and we had snow 2 weeks ago.
Sounds like fun. You like snow, huh?
Well, I grew up in a little town in Alaska, so I have learned to have snow be a part of my life. Shoveling out your car, having snowball fights, all the normal things.
Nice. So yeah, thanks again for taking the time. We know how busy our founders and executive of startups, and we will talk today about mining and new ways of mining and reinventing, traditional industries. But maybe before we kick it off, maybe say a few words about yourself and your journey, your amazing journey before joining Endolith.
Oh man. All right. Well, where to begin? I have a slide that I put together. Let me first off wave so everyone can see me. It's always helpful to put a face to a name. Here's a slide I made about me. I was just told I look far too serious in this picture, but I like it. As someone that had bluish purple hair, if I look serious, people never quite know what to make of me, and I can keep them guessing. And then when I show up and I tell jokes and laugh a lot, they're like, "What? Who are you?" So, as I mentioned, I grew up in a little town in Alaska, the kind of place where we didn't have paved roads. This is before the days of internet. We didn't have cable TV. We actually fished to get most of our food and grew a lot of our own vegetables. And we had to chop firewood to stay warm in the winter. It was an incredible, incredible place to grow up. From there, I went to school. I did my undergrad at Alaska, and then I went and got a master's and PhD at Wisconsin-Madison, where I studied astrobiology. I had the privilege to work for NASA to look at how microbial life evolved on early Earth as a proxy for life on Mars. It is the coolest thing I'd ever even heard about. And I was really, really fortunate to be able to do that for a few years. And then instead of becoming an academic and a teacher like I always thought I would, I ended up going to work for an oil and gas company and then a startup based in San Diego. And then I went to go work for AWS, or Amazon Web Service, as an architect. And I built these incredible cloud-based systems with global energy customers all over the world for this data platform called OSDU. After that, I moved to Edinburgh, was a VP of data architecture and data engineering for Wood Mackenzie, then left to become a CTO for this company called Cemvita, and now I am a founder and CEO of Endolith. If you are wondering how all of those things tie together, well, at the end of this presentation, in about 35 minutes, you'll actually see how the threads of cloud architecture and geomicrobiology and energy transition all come together. I also love talking about this stuff. So this is truly my honor and my privilege. Talking about what we're doing at Endolith, talking about mining, about sustainability is my favorite thing in the world. And I always tell people, be careful what you wish for, because if you ever cannot fall asleep, I will send you recordings of me just talking about the nuances of geomicrobiology to a level that no one really cares about aside from a few random PhDs, and it will cure you of your insomnia. But we'll keep it interesting today. I hope this is very interactive. Please put lots of questions in the chat. I don't want to speak at you. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Help me understand, what are the kind of like transferable skills or experience that allowed you to make this very uncommon shift from biological systems into cloud engineering, okay?
Yeah. Honestly, the biggest transferable skill goes back to growing up in a place that was a little, I don't want to say tough, because a lot of places are very tough and difficult to grow up with. And I know you all are calling in from all over the world. But growing up, you had to invent your way out of challenges. You had to chop firewood if you wanted to stay warm. It wasn't the life that you saw on TV. It wasn't a very easy life at times. And I learned that my single superpower as a human I have is hard work. When I'm outside my comfort zone, when I do not know what to do, I will roll up my sleeves and work harder than anyone else I've ever met because I find learning new things absolutely fascinating. So that is probably the single biggest transferable skill is just knowing what you don't know, not freaking out, just learning it and teaching yourself new things.
Yeah. And maybe we're getting a little bit personal here, but I'm curious about the personal story. I would imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, that from that little town in Alaska, not many people ended up having a PhD and working for NASA, AWS, and founding a product. So there was something in your upbringing, maybe your parents or maybe someone else, that actually they were the one that created the foundation to enable you to become what you are today. So if only if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about that, I think that's interesting.
Yeah, my parents are absolutely incredible. I have one younger brother who now has two kids, and I had the absolute best environment growing up. It was the kind of place where, hey, let's go play outside. Let's try new things. Let's do board games. Let's solve puzzles. We were constantly camping and fishing and in nature. And I remember my parents, my dad recently passed, but my mom now, we're talking about some of the challenges and how for them, the biggest thing for me was always letting me fail. And it was always so hard as a kid growing up because no one likes to fail. You don't like to do things and be bad at them. But it was really important. And I think for all of us, it's really important because when you fail, you learn so much more from the things you do wrong than the things you do right. And to that point, actually, at Endolith in our company, there's a few things that are core to our values. One is safety, it's a non negotiable. Two is critical feedback. I love critical feedback. I love when I'm presenting and people say, hey, this is good, but let me help you make it great. The worst feedback you can get is, oh, this is amazing, it's perfect, it's wonderful. But true care is people helping you to become the best version of yourself. And sometimes that is failing spectacularly, and other times it is just little course corrections.
Yeah. I have so many additional questions, but maybe that's for a different time. Well, one thing I would share. I remember. I think it was Dr. Carol Dweck that wrote the book Growth Mindset.
Yeah.
And I think she talked about kids' education, and there's something that she said. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think she said that really clicked with me in raising kids. When things doesn't work and your kid doesn't succeed in doing something, there is one very important word that if they are able to instill in their mind is critical, and it's the word yet. It's not that I didn't succeed yet, right?
And that is the crux of being a scientist, actually, right there. That is probably the biggest thing I learned during my PhD, because you do experiments day in and day out, and they fail probably 80% of the time. And sometimes it feels like banging your head against the wall, but that's how science is done. Science is not engineering. Science is trying to find universal truth about life. And in its infancy, it is ugly and messy, and it is rooted with so much failure.
Yeah. Okay, before we switch into biomining, maybe tell us a little bit what you like to do when you're not working.
Honestly, I work all of the time. My favorite hobby is working. I love to work, but the two things, if I had a spare day with nothing to do and I could do anything, my two favorite hobbies, and this is not widely known, so this is insider knowledge. I love to race bikes on a velodrome. If you've seen it at the Olympics, it's the very steep banked, you ride a fixed gear bike very, very fast. I actually have a trophy. One of my most prized possessions is my trophy over here from being Rookie of the Year in 2022 when I started racing in Houston. And I also love roller coasters, but I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I will not go mountain biking. I will not do anything where I can actually get hurt. I want the illusion of adrenaline, but actually to be incredibly safe.
Yeah. Is it true that the bikes in the velodrome do not have brakes? So if you want to brake,
they do not.
Yeah.
You slow down the pedals. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. Oh, it's so much fun. I could talk about bikes, actually. Bikes and microbes. That's what you guys showed up for, right?
exactly.
As we see the
So
numbers drop off, people are like, bikes and microbes, what?
yeah, so let's talk about microbes and mining and how the hell these two concepts
I know.
merge together. So yeah,
Awesome.
kick us off.
So I'm going to start by talking about copper. Today we're going to talk a lot about copper. And I do want to start by apologizing, because if you are not worried about copper right now, it's just going to be one more thing to worry about, because the world is facing a critical mineral crisis and copper is at the epicenter. Demand for copper is projected to double by 2025. This is driven by electrification, renewable energy, AI, but 70% of the world's copper is locked in these low-grade ores, and we have no way to get them out. And it's not an academic concern, but it really is something that, unfortunately, now that I mention it, you might start to pay attention to. The clean energy future is built on copper, which is increasingly difficult to extract. It actually creates this fundamental tension because we need more copper for a lot of things, but to extract it has a huge environmental toll. It's energy invasive, it's environmentally challenging. But let me quickly talk about why copper. I have a necklace that has a piece of copper on there. Copper is sometimes called the metal of electrification. It is the metal that is fundamental to every time you use electricity. So look around you, the light that is powered, your phones, your laptops, the electric grid, your car, everything that conducts electricity around you is based on copper. It's the second best electrical conductor out there, right after silver, but it's a fraction of the cost of silver. And it's not even just electronics. Copper has these natural antimicrobial properties, so it's used in hospitals and coatings. It's used in our plumbing systems because it's safe for drinking water, and it can be infinitely recyclable without losing performance. What makes it unique, though, is that there's no substitute for many of its applications. People have tried to replace it with aluminum, but it just can't be done. In fact, the average American home, and I'm in America, so I'll check my bias there, contains about 400 pounds of copper. A hospital, 70,000 pounds. So when we talk about copper, it's not just in things like plumbing, which is, interesting.
Yeah. Especially now when the transition to EVs and
exactly. Yeah, so we are actually seeing double the demand growth by 2050. And taking a step back, the Bronze Age, bronze is mostly copper. So if you're ever in a museum and see these Bronze Age artifacts, our ancestors have been using copper for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but now we're starting to need it at these bigger and bigger inflection points. Electric vehicles need 4 times more copper than conventional vehicles. Data centers, which power, AI that spell checks my email, they require 10 to 15 tons of copper, and renewable energy installations like, wind, solar, they take 5 to 12 times more copper than burning coal, for instance. What's really challenging about this, though, is everything is accelerating at the same time. It's not just AI, it's not just wind turbines or electric cars, it's every single thing. The analogy that I've used before is it's like having, 5 families move into a neighborhood and you have one well. All families are drinking from the same well and it's starting to run dry. How do you balance these legitimate needs? This means it's not just a supply chain issue, but it could potentially turn into a pretty massive civilization level bottleneck. And I get the privilege of talking to a lot of mining CEOs. And if you read the news, a lot of mining companies are like, yeah, we're doing great. But privately, they're like, yeah, we're kind of struggling here because we have to maintain our copper and we're not quite sure how to do it.
Yeah.
It takes 10 to 16 years to go from finding a new mine to getting first ore out of it. So even if we were to find 10 new mines now, which we're not going to find, our ancestors have used all the good copper, it would take a decade to add that copper to the supply, if not longer, plus the environmental impact there. So we can't mine our way out of this challenge. So let's talk about, now that we're feeling a little negative, we know about copper, let's talk about how we're using microbes and how we're doing some other things to solve this. But first, I want to make everyone here an expert in how copper mining works and how a specific type of copper mining called heap leaching works. And some of you probably know all about heap leaching because I'm going to show these beautiful cables in my next slide. But the way copper mining works today is this is a very simplistic view, but it all starts with extraction. The ore grades that we're mining, they've fallen dramatically. They used to be 2 or 3% copper a century ago, and now they're less than 0.5%. So we're having to move 2 to 5 times as much rock to get the same amount of copper. After we move that rock, we have to crush it. So we have to break these large rocks down into much smaller rocks that can be processed. That takes a lot of energy. And then we concentrate them, or we separate the good stuff from the waste rock. And finally, we historically have smelted it. That is where we'll take these high quality ores and we'll cook them, essentially. That only works, though, for really pure ores. And it's very energy intensive and releases a lot of gases. The 70% of the low-grade ores we have left today, we cannot use this process. We use another process called heap leaching or hydrometallurgy, which is my personal favorite picture. This is a screen grab from an actual small-scale heap leach deposit. When I say low-grade ores, these typically contain 0.2 to 0.4% copper. So 99.5% of this is some other rock. It really is a needle in a haystack. And for these low-grade ores, we rely on this process called heap leaching. For an example here, imagine the largest sports stadium you have been to. And instead of being filled with fans and with people playing sports, picture football, rugby, whatever your favorite is, no one's probably thinking American football here. That is the size of these heap leaches. They're absolutely massive. And less than a fraction of a percent of that, this little tiny bit, is the actual copper they're going to get out. The way heap leaching works is that they take the copper, or they take the rock, and they crush it. It comes relatively small, or they crush it relatively small, and they make these giant heaps or these giant piles. And they have to break down the rocks. Think of it from the size of cars to the size of gravel or pieces you can hold in your hand. And then they stack the material in these massive heaps using specialized equipment to make these mountains. And then comes the chemistry. Sulfuric acid is sprayed on top using these irrigation systems that you can see in these white lines that some of you probably actually have exposure to, which is pretty cool. It's similar to how you might water a garden or water plants, but instead of water, sulfuric acid at pH 1, pH 2 is put on top. They slowly trickle down through the rock, slowly dissolving the copper along the way. It takes months, it can take years, and then that copper is collected at the bottom using pipes and liners, and then it's sent for extraction, where it's plated out and then sent to market.
Yeah, maybe just for our audience, as I mentioned to you in one of our prep calls, one of our business groups called Netafim is the pioneer and market leader in drip irrigation. And actually, quite a lot of drip irrigation equipment, including the pipes, the drippers, the valves, are designed specifically for heap leaching.
Yeah.
So a lot of our equipment, well, not the same volume as we produce for agriculture, but we serve quite a lot of companies in Latin America and in the US that are active in the copper mining business with drip irrigation system exactly to do heap leaching.
Yes, and I tried to find a picture. I couldn't tell what brand this was, but it would not surprise me if this was yours.
Well, these guys, if I'm not wrong, they use sprinklers, so they spray on top of the heap. So Netafim, we have sprinklers, but sometimes they use drip irrigation, which is just the pipes dripping directly on the ground.
These may have some attachment points that are heading down. There are some additional like hybrid type systems too.
Yeah, and
it's
just for the knowledge of the audience, let's say you have this stadium size type of mountain of copper, which, as you said, only 0.something% of it is copper. How long it takes for an average mountain of dirt to be extracted and get something valuable out of it? Is it like days, months?
No, it's months to years. And then on top of this, when it's reached a steady state, they'll put another lift on top and on top and on top, and it just keeps going. These projects will run for years, sometimes decades, depending on the rates and the kinetics. It's an incredibly, incredibly slow process.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go into a little bit more, and if there's questions, I'm happy to go into the chemistry, the pH, the changes.
Okay.
Heap leaches are the future. Let me be very, very clear here. The traditional way of smelting ore with high-grade ores is only good with high-grade. Heap leaching is much more environmentally friendly. It is much more applicable to all different kinds of ore types, and it can be used in a variety of situations. The irrigation system is such a fantastic breakthrough. We're going to talk about what we do with Endolith, but spoiler alert at the high level, we take microbial communities, we put them in with the sulfuric acid into the irrigation systems and deliver them into the heaps. Our entire deployment would look like these 2 shipping containers in the background. This and optimizing this is, in my personal educated belief, how we are going to get rid of this copper bottleneck that we are going to have. But first, let's unpack a little bit more about the nuances of heap leaching. Again, you guys are all going to be experts by the time you leave here, or at least somewhat experts. So right now, the challenge with heap leaching is it's kind of a set it and forget it mentality. It, for the most part, operates relatively blind. These systems are set up, but there's really no real-time visibility. Recovery rates range from 10 to 50%, depending on the ore type you're using. If it's chalcopyrite versus if it's mixed sulfides with chalcocite, those tend to have higher recovery rates. There's no dynamic tuning. It tends to be pretty much like you driving a car with no dashboards, with no side windows. You're just going to keep going on that freeway. It's relatively inefficient, but it is an incredibly efficient process compared to not being able to do anything. And this is the challenge that we set out to solve at Endolith using microbes. First off, before I jump in too much, I want to talk about our team, because I am the CEO and founder here that is the PhD and knows about the microbes, but the rest of the team are miners. Christy Green, who leads technology, she has over 25 years at Freeport and Phelps Dodge, building these heap leaches at over $2 billion of scale. Our CFO, Andrew, has spent 25 years at BHP leading global copper strategy. And Renee, who leads business development, has 20 years of commercialization and sustainability at BHP and Rio Tinto. Our team is actually a team of miners that just happen to work in this biotechnology space. I'm incredibly fortunate and incredibly grateful to work around the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life, let alone I get to work with day in and day out. It's the coolest thing. Okay, so we've talked about heap leaching. We've talked about the team that's built it. Now let's talk about what these microbes are, what this platform is, how we're doing it.
So Liz, just to get everybody on the same page, a quick summary. So we're saying we need a lot of copper, okay? Copper,
massive amounts.
Yeah, copper quality decreases, so you need to be able to extract more out of the existing ores, okay? What would be the most common way to extract it is heap leaching, which is basically irrigating mountains of dirt, okay? And today this process is very inefficient because you use the same process and the same chemistry regardless of the actual composition of the ore and the actual concentration of the copper in the ore. So this introduces Endolith, which is going to help increase the recovery rates, correct?
Spot on. The other thing to tee up on here too is that these heap leaches are massive and they change over time. So when you first add on the rock, the temperatures are going to be relatively low. Over time, they tend to get a lot hotter. The outer brine, sometimes if you're somewhere like the Atacama and it gets very cold in the desert, can be close to 0 degrees C at night. But inside the heap leaches, it can be 65, 70 degrees C. So there's a lot of variability as you go inside the heap. The pH is incredibly low. It's pH 1 to pH 2. You have other heterogeneities. The minerals are all very different. These are pockets of like essentially gravel or rocks where the sulfuric acid is trickling down. So it's not a beautiful, sandy, homogeneous mixture like you might see at a lake or a beach.
And the
And
temperature,
they change over time.
The temperature increase, is it because that some of the processes are exothermic?
Yes. And it's actually really cool. So one of the main minerals in here is pyrite, FeS2, or fool's gold. It's a iron sulfide. And microbes break that down. Other things can break it down too, but that's an exothermic reaction. We want the core of these heaps to be hot because the hotter they are, typically the better you can break down the chalcopyrite. There are some other nuances too. With the mineral chalcopyrite that I've talked about, what happens is after you break down a certain percent of it, you tend to get what's called a passivation layer on the outside, or you get a physical blocking. So you can only really get about half of it before it just stops. And there's a lot of debate in the scientific community around what that looks like, but it's a real physical challenge. You cannot just put more sulfuric acid on there and get more.
Yeah.
And so we, at a very high level, use nature's oldest miners, microbes. Let me quickly take a step back before I go into any of these other slides. But microbes, and I'll use the term microbe, but it can mean both bacteria and archaea, which are single-celled organisms. They're typically around a micron in diameter. You can fit 1,000 on them on the tip of your hair. They have been around for billions and billions of years. I like to use the analogy that if I was the age of the Earth, 4.6 billion years, multicellular life would have evolved like around my shoulders, but microbes would have evolved around my knees. So microbes had a much bigger head start on Earth than anything else. They were around for between 3.5 billion years and 500 million years ago. They did things like produce the oxygen that we are breathing. Most of the weathering of rock, the geochemical cycles that we know today are all facilitated by microbes. This is the thing my PhD is in that I'll talk about forever and ever, but they have had so long to be really good at facilitating redox reactions, breaking down iron and sulfur, breaking down rock, those types of things. And that's who we put in, are these little microbial miners, these little microbial minions. It's not quite as simple though, as just taking one microbe and growing it up at scale, getting a big test tube or beaker full of your chosen microbial friends and pouring them on there and saying, go to work, microbe friends, do your thing. It's actually, to be effective at this, it's more complicated. The mining industry has been trying to use microbes for the past 40 years. In some elements like gold, they've been incredibly successful. Copper has been a lot more challenging, and we think we finally cracked it. It's because we have the microbes, because we're able to work with these heap leaches and this field heap deployment. We've also built a cloud native platform using a lot of the cool tools that I've learned with my time at AWS so that we're able to optimize a lot of things. One other thing I want to talk about real quickly is that we use microbial communities. Heavy hands make a lot of work. Heavy hands make light work. I have found that when I'm working on a team, I'm able to focus on what I can do the best. Other people around me can focus on what they do the best. Microbes are very similar. By putting microbial communities together, we're able to optimize the members so that they can each specialize in what they do. This is not like Jurassic Park. We are not using novel organisms that we're engineering. We're not creating synthetic life. We are working with naturally occurring microbes that already exist and exposing them to harsher and harsher conditions so that they operate faster and they can mine faster. I broadly call this biological intelligence because it combines the microbes and the optimization and the cloud computing pieces. But at its core, it's really all about the bacteria, which I put a whole slide in to break it down. This picture on the top is a little schematic of what I imagine they would look like if they have little hard hats breaking down the pyrite and then catalyzing some of the other species. These microbes, they essentially act as nature's chemists. You can think of it that way. When they're in the field and they grow, they breathe the rocks or they eat the rocks, whichever analogy you prefer. They're happy to live at pH 1, pH 2. They do not eat sugar or eat carbon the way you and I do, but instead they produce acids, they produce oxidizing agents, and they dissolve the metals faster and more efficiently than a lot of industrial chemicals. Different microbes have evolved at different rates, different types, and they work together in different ways that allow us to put together different microbial tools from our toolkit. You can think of it like having billions of tiny specialized miners working around the clock.
So are we talking about one type of a microbe, or are we talking about multiple types?
Multiple types.
And what's the difference between each type?
So some of them, as I mentioned, there are many different minerals within these heaps. And each of these have different metabolisms that overlap. The analogy here would be if these were miners, some of them might use a jackhammer, some of them might use a shovel, some of them might use a wheelbarrow. That's essentially what these do. Some of them break down iron, some break down sulfur, some break down copper. They break down the different minerals in different successions, which allow them to liberate the copper.
So they basically break down all the things that you don't need, and they keep the copper untouched, or they also have certain processing capabilities targeting the copper itself?
They essentially get that copper into solution so you can plate it out, but to do that, they have to eat through a lot of the other rocks.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that these processes occur in mines. There's native microbes that exist out there to begin with. Really, everywhere in Earth right now has microbes in it. Us humans actually have 10 times more bacterial cells on you than human cells. Microbes are on the plants, they're in the soil, they're a key part of how we have evolved to be successful on this planet.
Yeah.
Our innovation here lies, though, in harnessing and figuring out which bugs are the good bugs and how they can outcompete and go faster by partnering with biology.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat yet, so.
Don't worry about it. I
People are probably like, microbes, I love microbes, they're my buddies, they're my friends. It also means that we can use different microbes for different minerals. We have a fridge and freezer full of over 50 different communities that we've grown. We're focused on copper now. We've done work on the past, on lithium clays, on nickel laterites, on iron. Microbes have incredible capabilities. This is not new to the industry, but getting them to work at scale is net new. And this is where we come in. Our platform, I mentioned biological intelligence. But we have targeted microbial communities. We have a modular biohatchery system that I'll show you. And then we have this real-time analytics platform. So every time we do an experiment in lab, my office is in a storage closet in Denver. Most of our people are in lab doing incredible work. This is actually a picture of some of our people in lab I took the other day. Every time we do anything, we get the data, we put it in the cloud, and we are able to learn from that to create this perpetual cycle. In the field, what that looks like at a very rough schematic is that first we have to understand the microbes that are in the field. I mentioned there's native microbes already out there. An analogy that I like to use is the Anna Karenina hypothesis of molecular ecology, but essentially it's from Russian literature where all happy families are happy, all unhappy families are unhappy in different ways. And all perfectly functioning microbial systems are perfectly functioning, but everything that's out of whack or dysbiotic is dysbiotic in a different way. So the first thing we need to do is understand the ore, figure out what the rocks are, and then figure out what the right microbes are for the job. That allows us to figure out which team of microbes we tag in. The next thing we do is a continuous inoculation. So we grow up these microbes in big vats and we deliver them in real time, adapting to the heap's needs and conditions. It's a dynamic process, it changes over time. And then step 3 is we inoculate, or we monitor the inoculation so that we can fine tune our strategies as needed. It's a cohesive system where we're living and learning in real time. It also means that as we scale and as we touch more rocks, we get smarter. On the left is just a high-level curve of every heap, every rock we touch means that we have more data. We can get the right microbes in there faster. Smarter microbes or faster recovery, and faster recovery means more copper in the ecosystem today. On the right is an image of the Sentinel Leach analytics platform that we built. With these heaps and with mining customers, you don't really trust what you can't see. And so to demystify the process, we've done a lot of work to provide insights, real-time controls, insights, a way that you can see what's happening. It
And
creates essentially, yeah.
How do you get the data to basically close the loop, as I like to call it? Like, do you have sensors in the heap? Where exactly? You said it can take months and sometimes years for a certain concentration of, I don't know, liquid copper plus some other stuff to precipitate through the heap all the way to the bottom. So tell us a little bit, what are kind of like the sensors or the things that help you understand what exactly happens inside the system?
That's a great question. And it varies depending on the technical sophistication of the mining customer and where they are. Some of them have sensors that are embedded or they're working with. Others will go out there and collect the data ourselves. When we collect the microbial samples, we'll work with them to actually get the samples. In our lab, we have SCADA systems hooked up. We have a PLC for every experiment we are running so that we can collect that data. We're all in on AWS, so we are using different processes to stream the data directly to the cloud so that we know what's happening in near real time. But data is incredibly powerful.
Do you have kind of like inline sensors that send the data continuously, or need to have people go and pick samples, put them in a certain reader, and then they send you the information?
Yeah, so we are not a sensor company. We have not built real-time sensors to go into things like the irrigation systems. That would be incredible. And if anyone on the team is working on that, please ping me, because that's where we would like to go. Some mining companies have in situ sensors for different parameters. Not everything shown here. I have iron, ORP, sulfur, things like that. We can do sampling of the fluid that moves through the PLS or the raffinate. Moving to in situ is really the gold standard and where we'll need to go.
Yeah. Cool.
If only there was a company that was looking at irrigation lines that I was talking to right now. Huh.
Yeah, but to be honest, I don't think it's super complicated. Like I'm sure there are sensors out there. Maybe the challenge is to put them in the right place in the heap and connect them in a way that you can read the data remotely somehow.
And that part's actually not that difficult. A big part of it too is just doing it once or twice to show the value. If you can get 1% out of a heap leach that is, I think, 1 million tons, that's $2 or $3 or $4 million of additional revenue for the mining company a year. It's massive.
Yeah.
That's just for 1%.
Yeah.
One thing to call out, though, is that mining companies they tend to be very slow moving by nature. I've worked in a bunch of verticals. Mining companies are some of the most slow moving ones, which is by design. They have to be safe. They have to make sure they're adding minerals to the global estate. And to offset that, we have created a scale up path where we start with lab tests, and then we do different scopes of tests in lab. This is an image of what's happening in lab behind me right now. These are some columns where we'll do a very small scale mini heap deployment in a box, essentially. These are fully outfitted with sensors. We do sampling with a very high frequency. These are connected to SCADA systems so that we know at a microcosm what is happening as we test our microbes, as we test how we will go to the field. From there, we are sending our first reactor to the field in 2 months, in 3 months, and then we're working with a number of companies to scale up from there. I want to share this data real quickly, and then the rest of it is really high level about kind of how we're scaling things like that. So I've talked a lot about microbes. They make a difference. This is really cool. This is cool. Yes, that's all great and wonderful. Let me show you some actual data. First off, we had a press release come out with BHP a week ago that validated some of our technology, which is great. BHP is one of the largest copper miners in the world. This curve on the right shows copper recovery on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. There are three lines. This black line that tapers out at around 40% is what happens if there's no microbes in the system. The brown are the native microbes, or the ones that already exist out there, and this blue curve are our microbes. This is a pretty significant kinetics, so time value of money, getting copper a lot faster. We've shown this on multiple different ore types, including BHP's ore at different temperatures. This is an example from 65 degrees C, because as I mentioned, these heaps have different temperature regimes. So this is just some data that we've gotten recently showing how our microbes compare to no microbes.
This is very impressive. And like you said, there are two value levers here. One is getting more copper out of a given ore, and the second is getting it faster. So if you're a mining company, if you can sell the stuff 1 year earlier, that has a lot of value because you actually bring the cash flow faster.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mentioned some of those numbers earlier, but if you have a large scale heap and you are processing, let's say 100,000 tons of ore a day with around 0.3% copper, if you're getting half of that, that is 150 tons of copper. If we are able to get these results here, which we're not planning on, this is lab data. We are thinking we will get a much more conservative estimate in the field. But if we could get anything with this, and there's a lot of technologies in the pipeline showing that, if we can get anything close to 107 times improvement, that goes from 150 tons and adds in an additional 100 tons a day without mining any additional mines, without taking any more ore in, without any new energy expenditures, just mining it smarter. Over the course of a year, that's enough to manufacture like 50,000 electric vehicles, all from material that otherwise is just going to turn into waste, which is what is our North Star at the company. We want to get more copper from materials that would otherwise be waste. We don't want to go down to the bottom of the sea and mine the seabed. We don't want to go to the moon. We don't want to have to create new mines everywhere. We want to get the most out of what we already have.
But by the way, another question that is now popping into my mind, what's the carbon? I know it's variable in different type of geographies and different types of ore quality, but can you give us a sense of what is the carbon footprint of 1 kg or 1 ton of copper? I mean, from mining to processing to heap leaching to transportation to, let's say we want to get a 1 ton of copper cables, right? What's the carbon footprint of that 1 ton? It's probably insane.
Yeah, I actually don't know. There are very few questions that I do not know the answer to. That's a great question.
Because I think that could be interesting to show, because at the end of the day, if you can improve by 1.5 or 2x the recovery, this means that you can pretty much apply the same factor, maybe a little bit less, to the carbon footprint, and that's massive.
Yeah, and to be clear, when we go to the field, we're targeting getting 10% more copper back. We want to under-promise, we want to over-deliver, we want to make sure that we can do exactly what we say we're going to do, even though our lab tests are being incredibly powerful. I think I talk a little bit. We're working publicly with Rio Tinto, BHP, 6 of the largest copper customers. A lot of them are not public yet. We have a JDA, we have a field site at final stages of an MOU. We're a small company though. We are 16 people with our 2 labs based in Denver. We're a VC-backed company. We closed our seed round in March of last year, so 15 months ago, and we kicked off our Series A raise yesterday, which is pretty cool. In the past year, we've doubled our revenue. And this is our ramp. I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. But we, since then, we've been all hands on deck trying to get to the field as quickly as possible because we want to do this and we want to make it work and contribute copper to the global estate. With that, our first field trials will be happening in 2 months, and then we're planning progressively larger and larger field deployments. With that, I have a few more slides. I can talk about the business model and kind of where we are, but I think the cool thing is really the technology. So with this, what other questions do you have?
Yeah. By the way, I did run a quick query on ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Okay. And the carbon footprint, putting all the caveats on ChatGPT responses, okay? But 1 ton of copper cable could end up having somewhere between 3.6 and 5.5 tons of CO2. And what's very interesting that the majority of it is coming from the mining and production step, which you guys are addressing. So
yeah,
big part of the footprint is coming from the production, not from the cable manufacturing or from the transportation.
Very interesting. For us, it really is about getting more copper from the same ore, decreasing the need for mining footprints, also using less sulfuric acid. The production of sulfuric acid can be incredibly harsh, and valorization of waste, which is a very overplayed term, but essentially these tailings, these rocks that are essentially not economic right now, making them into something economic while using less water and yes, less energy per pound of copper.
Yeah. And maybe some questions sorry, do we have more slides, or can we jump into questions from the audience?
We can jump into questions.
Okay. So there are some questions on the usage of the sulfuric acid, in the sense of how concentrated is it? Can it be recycled, or is it consumed completely during the process? What happens to the acid throughout the entire months of precipitating through the heap? So talk to us a little bit about the sulfuric acid.
Great question. So in this picture here, as you can kind of see it, the sulfuric acid is sprayed on there. It then gets collected with everything that's come out of solution. And then it becomes what's known as PLS, or a pregnant leach solution. And it goes into this process called solvent extraction and electrowinning, where they take the copper and they essentially electroplate it out. They can recycle a lot of it and turn it back into raffinate, which goes back into the top of it after they remove the copper. The thing is, as they are adding more and more lifts on, and as the heaps get bigger, they're just going to need more. So it is a cradle to cradle type process.
And you basically you irrigate or you spray the heap continuously, month over month over month?
Yep. Our bugs are in there month over month. The other thing about the microbes is when they break down some of these minerals like pyrite, the oxidation of pyrite creates sulfate, depending on the pH and the EH of the system. But essentially, you'll get sulfate, which can then turn into H2SO4, which is your sulfuric acid moiety. So you can create more sulfuric acid if you're doing this correctly and using the right microbes in the right progression. Because if you don't create sulfuric acid during the heap leaching process, then when it becomes mine tailings or mine waste, you have the potential to create acid mine drainage and sulfuric acid then.
Interesting. Another question that tried to connect your technology with our mining operations. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but we operate very big mines of fluorspar in Mexico. Okay.
Oh.
Actually, the largest fluorspar mines in the world. We own 40% of the global reserve of fluorspar. And the question that we have from the team is, do you have any experience, or do you have any insight on whether this could be applied to fluorspar mining?
I have actually never thought of that. This is 2 questions in one I've never thought of, which makes me so egregiously happy. I'm going to walk out and talk to the technical team after this. I do know that fluoride ions are incredibly, they can be very radical, but microbes do have some really cool ways that they can take care of dealing with those. It would be very interesting.
So essentially, before fluorine become very radical, as you called it, it basically behaves like an ore. Okay, so the mines that we have, we basically extract rocks that contains fluorspar, and then we need to purify it, and only further down the road, then it becomes the type of molecule that people talk about its difficulties, right? But before that, it behaves like a rock.
What pH are, we can take these conversations
Yeah,
offline.
we'll take it offline. We'll take it offline. But yeah, it would be interesting because we do see some ore quality differences in different parts of our mines, which is very, very common in mining.
What we've done, for instance, with lithium clays, there's a lot of domestic lithium clays here in the US, and we have a system where we use microbes to work on removing some of the gangue material, the stuff that contains a lot of calcite, a lot of the chalk, the stuff you do not want. And we have found that these microbial slurries, because it's not just an acid, it's not the same as if you were to just get a sulfuric acid, but when you put them into the process flow diagram, since they contain the microbes, and that's kind of like a microbial super slurry that has organic acids, it has proteins, it has other pieces, those interact with the rock and the rock facies in much more unique ways than organic or inorganic acids that tend to be much more homogeneous.
Yeah.
Oh, this is cool. This is cool.
We also have a few questions on the microbes.
I love microbes. They are the most unsung heroes. If you leave here with nothing else, copper and microbes, appreciation for those two.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about the kind of like the life cycle of the microbe, how long they live, do they die, do they reproduce, like a little bit about the whole process from, I don't know, birth to death, if you want to call it this way.
Let me start by saying that microbes are the workhorses of so many industrial fermentation products. For instance, a real quick fun fact I recently learned is that there is a huge global energy savings of washing your clothes in cold water or tap water as opposed to warm water, because microbes can produce the enzymes that make it effective to get dirt out of your clothes at cold water. Like they're used all throughout the value chain. Here, in an ideal world, we set these microbes out, we put them in these heap leaches, they're fat and happy, and they go out and they find a delicious piece of rock and they set up shop and they grow and they reproduce quickly and they have a big microbial family, and then that creates lots and lots of copper into solution. That is what would happen in an ideal world. There are probably places in the heap, though, where microbes are already doing that, or they don't have food, and then they just go on a fun little journey, a ride where they go into the heap, and then they would come out along with the sulfuric acid and go to the electrowinning plant and potentially start it all over again. These microbes, as I mentioned, live in pH 1 to pH 2. We've done a lot of work to sequence their DNA, their RNA to understand what is happening. And we also use a process called adaptive laboratory evolution. So let's say that for this type of process, you have higher and higher salt concentrations because you're using brackish water instead of potable water. We will slowly take these microbes and introduce them to salt water, or if we're working on copper arsenic ores, to more and more arsenic, so that they can get used to it, they can upregulate some of their gene cassettes, and they can reproduce faster.
Yeah. And, dealing with biological ecosystems and living creatures can introduce all kind of like weird and complicated problems,
I mentioned Jurassic Park earlier.
Right?
Oh, for sure. I mentioned Jurassic Park earlier. There are a few reasons why we are not using gene modification. We're not using gene editing. We're not using any of those techniques. We are using we are using techniques that we feel align with our first cultural principle, which is safety.
Yeah. No, but I mean in terms of like getting all kind of like wacky problems of, all kind of like, certain diseases or things that they develop in communities,
Oh, yeah. These bugs would die if they were exposed to anything other than like 65 degrees C and pH 1 to 2. If you put these on the countertop, they would die. They are very, very specific conditions. They also eat rocks. They cannot live eating sugar. They cannot live in human hosts. They're non-pathogenic types of microbes. They need very, very, very specific conditions.
Yeah. Okay, Liz, unfortunately, we're getting close to the hour, and maybe last question before we need to, end this amazing presentation. What keeps you awake at night?
I mean, the year is 2025. I am living through my third or fourth once in a generation existential crisis. So many things, to be very blunt and very honest. The world is a very interesting place, and there's a lot of things that keep me awake at night. That's not a very good answer, but it's
related to Endolith, maybe not your, to the entire universe.
Because it's all a part of the big universe. If you just operate in a lane and don't think about the people in the global community around you, that's not the kind of person I want to be. So instead, I think about the things I can't control and the things I can control and everything else going on. And it's the truth. It is what is this world? How can we as a company act locally to make a big difference? How can we be the best global citizens we can be? How can we contribute more copper that will help everyone get access to clean and affordable energy? And how can we just make the most of every single precious day that we're given? That's what I think about every single day. I'm incredibly lucky to be here. I have the best, most fun job at the world. I get to come in and talk to people like you, which is so incredible. I'm very, very lucky.
And so maybe I'll ask it differently. What you think you have to nail in the next 12 months for Endolith to be successful?
Well, we got to close our Series A, or we just started our Series A, so we have to get fundraising in. We're going to go to the field. We have a bunch of microbes working on different ore types. We have a bunch of different customer relationships, and we have a team that we are continuing to grow and scale.
Sounds like a good summary.
Normal CEO problems.
Yeah. Cool. Liz, thank you so much for joining. It was amazing. It was insightful. It was reassuring. I really hope you'll succeed. If we can help in any way, we'd love to help you either through irrigation systems or fluorspar mining. Any question, any problem that you have with how to deploy those microbes through the irrigation system, please let us know. And yeah, we wish you all the best in the world. If we can help in the fundraising, let me know. And thank you so much for joining.
This has truly, truly been my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Take care. And thank you very much for the audience. And we'll see you next month in the next episode of Expand Your Horizon. Have a good spring in some of the countries, right? Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.